Hey, what's up to the American Aboriginals? I did a quick search on Google and I just wanted to see what it said about American slavery. So, um, and what I found was that there are parts of slavery that of our American history that seems to be hidden. So, I thought I would read some documents and share what I found. So let's get into it. So I found this article that was written in 1897 and it's called Chinese Slavery in America by Charles Frederick Holder. And this particular article you can find in the Yale archives. You can find it in Justia. So this is a pretty well documented article, but somehow I've never heard it, I've never seen it. And if I pull a tab of, slavery in America, let's look at some images. This is what I find. All of the so called Black folks, aka the American Aboriginal people. All Aboriginals. But somehow in 1897, there was a group of slaves that was written about. And if you probably did a Google search back in those days, you probably would hear about them. So I thought I'll read this. So this is called Chinese Slavery in America by Charles Frederick Holder. It says, among the factors which have aided in producing industrial unrest on the Pacific slope during the past decade had been the aimed, unrestricted pouring in of alien races, particularly the Chinese. The question has assumed grave importance, especially in California, where almost every political contest during the past 20 years has been some bearing upon the so called colonization of the Chinese in America and the usurpation of the industrial field in Americans of the American citizen. While this aspect of the question has been the disturbing and dominated feature continually before the public, there is another and darker side to its alien movement, one which shows the Chinese in America to be a constant menace to law and order and morality. Several months ago, the Chinese consul of San Francisco waited in some state on one of the missions in the city and demanded that the release of a fugitive slave for the honor, the quote unquote honor of China and the Chinese. The representative of the emperor was rebuffed, and he retired to advise his countrymen who owned the woman by right of purchase to apply an American method known as writ of habeas corpus. This was done, the woman being taken into court and fought over several weeks, during which the world at large became aware that there existed in America a system of slavery as obnoxious and debased and as could be found in any slave dealing country of today. So apparently, this Chinese girl going to court made people realize there was a such thing as slavery. Meanwhile, at the same time, they're telling us that, you know, we were enslaved, it was prevalent, everybody knows about it. Um, it's just a thing, it's part of American culture. So, um, let's get back to it. So, There was nothing remarkable in the action of the consul, as the peculiar and elastic code of morals possessed by the Chinese permits slavery, recognizing it as an institution to be protected and fostered, especially in America. The large Chinese settlements in San Francisco has made this traffic in human beings not merely possible, but a business followed as a means of profitable investment under the protection and patronage of two Chinese societies. And here, in the heart of an American city, we find one of the best organized slave marts of modern time, fostered by as motley a band of criminals as could be produced in any portion of the uncivilized world, a band numbering 3,000 who derive their support directly or indirectly from the sale and barter of female slaves. Again, this was written in 1897. The Chinese population of San Francisco estimated at 20,000. Of these, 5,000 are factory hands, 5,000 claim to be merchants, 4,000 are domestic servants, 3,000 are the criminals referred to, and 3,000 are women and children. Of the 2,500 females, it is estimated with more or less accuracy that 1,000 are legitimate wives, the remaining 1,500 being slaves in the fullest sense of girls kidnapped in their homes in the Orient and brought to America by fraud and impostor, passed through the custom house under false oaths in fear of death or dire consequences, put up at auction. Again, they were put up at auction before professional slave merchants, knocked down to the highest bidder, and condemned, in the majority of instances, to a life under duress in the Chinese brothels of the American city. Such a slave, the Chinese consul referred to, demanded. The woman had been sold and believed that she was a slave, but when her master attempted to sell her 6-year-old child, when her master attempted to sell her 6-year-old child on the ground that she gave it too much care and that it interfered with her work, she fled to one of the missions and asked for shelter and protected there, learning for the first time that she was a free woman under the laws of the United States. After a long legal contest, she was returned to the charge of the Methodist mission. Now, what do they tell us in American history on who lived among the missions? Did they tell us Native Americans? The Indians? So are they runaway Chinese slaves? A young Chinese girl from 9 to 12 years of age in San Francisco today has a market value from $150 to $500. A girl from 12 to 16, if attractive, is quoted on change among the highest bidders, who constitute the brokers in the unique American exchange, at from $500 to $1,500, while for girls over this age, the prices range up to $3,500, which has been paid on, I guess, the very ground that such an investment and return to profit of 20 or 30%. Slavery has existed among the Chinese in California for years and continues almost unrestricted. As these lines are written, the courts of San Francisco are fighting over the case of a slave named Fong, who claims to have been kidnapped in China, brought to America, and sold to the highest bidder. She finally escaped to one of the missions that has so far successfully defied her owners. And as a result, the question of Chinese slavery will undoubtedly be thoroughly ventilated. The investigation of this and other cases and examination of the records of the Chinese American missions, show that slavery of the most horrible and debased nature is being carried on wherever the Chinese have a foothold. From authoritative sources, it has been learned that slaves are, as a rule, badly treated, and the court and mission records abound in citations showing cross cruelty. The slaves are of two classes: young girls used as household drudges, and adults held for immoral purposes by their owners, who rent or sell them. The criminal or slave dealing class constitutes an important element of Chinatown and has, as an organized system, so elaborately and cunningly devised that, so far as it has been impossible to stamp out this practice, it seems incredible that slavery should be boldly advocated and carried on with all the elaboration and system that characterizes any successful commercial project. Yet America is the principal field of the Oriental slave dealer. Again, America is the principal field of the Oriental slave dealer, and San Francisco the headquarters for those engaged in the traffic. Here on DuPont Street, until within a short time, was an apartment known as the Queen's Room, in reality a public slave mart, where the victims were brought in exhibit to dealers and would be purchased. The two societies already mentioned have systemized the business in such a manner that is a very simple process to evade the American law. The headquarters are in San Francisco, agents being stationed at Canton, Amoy, and other large Chinese cities. These places I've never heard of, so these in turn have sub-agents in the suburban districts, whose duty it is to kidnap the victims and forward them to the agent at the shipping ports, who usually co-signs them to a traveling or confidential agent whose duties is not alone in guarding the human property, but in instructing the woman so that they will be able to pass the custom house authorities. Unfortunately, the Chinese law and custom of marriage aids the kidnapper. A wife rarely sees her husband before marriage, the affair being a business arrangement, pure and simple, and the girl bargained for by the agent of the prospective husband. The agent of the San Francisco dealer, in the fulfillment of the duty, pretends to represent a wealthy man searching for a wife. In this guise, he approaches a country girl to whom he holds an inducement of a rich husband at Canton. Inexperienced, her imagination excited by the picture of a life of luxury or ease drawn by the agent, she consents to accompany him to meet her husband and leaves her home never to return. So, if she agreed to go live somewhere for some money, you know, hey. So, arriving at some point, the agent invents a story to the effect that the husband has been called away to another place and has left word for her to follow. All right. So I'm gonna go back. So the agent of the San Francisco dealer, in the fulfillment of his duty, pretends to represent a wealthy man searching for a wife. In this guise, he approaches a country girl to whom he to whom he holds out the inducement of a rich husband at Canton, and inexperienced, her imagination excited by the picture of a life of luxury or ease drawn by the agent, she consents to accompany him to meet her husband and leaves her home never to return. Arriving at some port, the agent invents a story to effect that the husband has been called away to another place and has left word for her to follow. Still unsuspicious, she is shipped to an American steamer with others in charge of another agent, where far out at sea the victim usually rebels but is quieted by the agent, who now informs her that she is in greatest danger, that if she cannot succeed in passing the American officials in San Francisco, she will be thrown into prison and subject to torture. There is one opportunity to escape, she is told, and that is by pretending that she is a married woman returning to her husband after a visit to China. She is also given a forged certificate and a slip containing the name and address of her supposed husband in San Francisco. This story, the victim is forced to earn and adhere to under threats of violence or death, and she is a terrified girl readily enters this into the scheme to deceive the American Custom House of officers, who are supposed to enforce a vigorous examination in each case. But despite this, there are hundreds of illegal entries. So people enter this country claiming one thing, but it's not really true. I've never heard that before. The Honorable John H. Weiss, collector of the Port of San Francisco, in reply to a letter from the writer said, "We have nothing to indicate the character of Chinese women who come here for the purpose of landing. Those who have come since I have had charge of this office claim to be either married women or native born. The question of the right of either to land is determined by the proof presented. If there are any prostitutes among, they would be generally found among those who claim to be native born, and we frequently hear of girls so landed being in houses ill fame. But there is no way to reach them because they come and land as native born. And while they can submit ample proof of nativity, the government is unable to produce evidence to the contrary." So they lie and say they're Native Americans. The girls who are examined before the collector for admission are valued at from $150 to $3,500, the latter sum having been paid to in one instance. Consequently, every effort is made by the co-signee to bring them through the ordeal successfully. This accomplished, the girl, who perhaps still expects to meet her promised husband, is taken to a boarding house provided with rich wardrobe and rendered as attractive as possible. She is now, or she used to be before the place was closed by the police, conducted to the Queen's room, which she is told belongs to her husband, and where she is to receive his friends. The girl is now really an exhibition for sale. The girl is now really on exhibition for sale and is critically examined by the high binders, slave dealers, speculators, brothel keepers, and others interested in the sale. Finally, a price is agreed upon, and she becomes the property of some man who she supposes to be her husband. The plot is not discovered by the credulous victim until her master hands her over to the keeper of the brothel and four-fifths of the cases of slavery. This is the method of procedure, which it is needless to say is invariably effective, the victim rarely, if ever, escaping. A atypical instances is that of a girl who was kidnapped in Canton. The Chinese agent received $185 for her and handed her over to Gu Ka Shang, a professional slave dealer. Gu had no certificate, so he invoked the American law and brought the girl ashore on a writ of habeas corpus, where, after some controversy in the courts, she was released and spirited up to the country by the master's wife, who sold her to a man for $600. Her new owner beat her persistently for moral insubordination or for refusing to debase herself, and finding her rebellious, sold her to a Chinaman who agreed to marry her and pay for her on the installment plan, which he finally did. It might be assumed that the tribulations of the slave woman were over, but about the time of the last payment of her husband made a journey to China, leaving her in the care of his brothers. The latter, in the course of time, finding themselves in need of money, determined to sell their sister-in-law, but the woman made such a vigorous resistance that they were prevented from carrying out their plan. So the Chinese were selling folks here. Resisted their plan. So they then began systematically to beat her so that she could run away, and they would claim that she has deserted her husband. Failing in this, they hired a professional hide binder and murderer to mark her. This man fired at her once and, failing, lost his courage. Another hatchet boy was employed to mark her, but being paid in advance, he warned the woman and fled to China with the money. Another attempt would have been made, but at this juncture she was rescued by the Reverend N.R. Johnston and taken under the protection of the Chinese mission in San Francisco with one child, the other 15 months old, having been sold by her husband's brother despite her opposition. So they sold babies. The records of the mission should be similar accounts, a series of horrors which should arouse a protest all over the land. Why? I thought slavery was normal. The instance of the girl Wong Soon illustrates the tenacity of purposes which characterizes the slave dealer. Since the enactment of the Registration Act, it has been more difficult to introduce slaves, and girls who formerly brought out 150 are now valued at $800. The father of the girl in question had borrowed a certain sum of a slave dealer named Kum Mo, and being unable to liquidate the debt, gave his daughter 6 years of age as full payment. He gave his child away that was 6 years old. The child was discovered in one of the worst dens in the famous Bartlett Alley in San Francisco, from which she was taken by the Presbyterian Mission authorities on an order of arrest, the charge being that she was a minor in a house of ill repute. This child was valued at $1,500. And our owners began a legal contest which well demonstrated the power and influence society of a slave dealer. Kun Wah, through an American lawyer of ability, attempted to have the guardianship of the Presbyterian mission superintendent set aside, and Ma Sing, a keeper of the brothel, appointed in her place. For weeks, this case was brought by the Chinese slave dealers and the Christian woman of the Presbyterian mission. The American lawyer attempted by every means to drive the latter from the court. The Chinese societies engaged in this traffic have a large fund. They have a large fund for the prosecution of disputed cases and aided by American lawyers and the writ of habeas corpus. They are often successful in regarding possession of these human shadows. To fight these societies, several demonstrators, not only by the Presbyterian and Methodists, have established missions in San Francisco where slaves are taken, and every effort made to break up the nefarious practices of the slave dealer. You know, um, a few years later, they started opening up these Indian schools for orphans. I wonder, are they these children? But the manager of one of the missions recently stated that the law was almost inoperative, that women and girls were still being bought and sold and condemned to a life of shame, and that instead of being an asylum for the oppressed, America, or that portion people by the Chinese, was as black as the slave market as any of the world had yet seen. So the Chinese slave market was called a black slave market. The missions of San Francisco and their managers are naturally the object of attack, and the high binders and slave dealers make every possible attempt at retaliation. Repeated efforts have been made to kidnap rescue girls. The managers threatened with death, marked by the hatchet boys for destruction. But their good work goes on, girls and women being rescued by the law and by force when the law is not applicable to the case. It is difficult, if not impossible, to present adequately the full horror of this practice of slavery, which should be known, and doubtless the mission authorities will tell the whole story to those interested in philanthropic work. The life of slave is a chapter telling of total debasement and ill treatment. The mission managers have found girls who have been burnt with red hot irons, dragged about by their hair, and had their eyes propped open with sticks. Slaves that are resold are sold by a contract, a document which, while unfit for publication, is a most remarkable paper, showing that the sale of woman is looked upon in the same light as that of the lowest animals. At the present time, at the present time, every effort is being made to suppress this traffic, but under the existing law, little can be expected. The women are brought in boldly on forged certificates or false oaths of their nativity, smuggled in at the Mexican and Canadian borders, and without some extraordinary effort, slavery will continue uninterrupted on American soil. So, as you can see, slavery happened here, and actually some efforts were made to ban it. So it's not like this was something that wasn't known, because there were laws trying to prevent it. And this article doesn't even seem real. You seem like, oh, well, maybe, I made it up or something. But I'm going to go back and I'm going to show that this is real, and even the Stanford Journal of Asian American History Studies cites it. You can find it in the Library of Yale. And so let's go and see what this particular writer talks about. Apparently they had drug houses in San Francisco. They were called opium palaces. So let's see what the Asian Studies in San Francisco has to say. Yet beyond the portrayal of daily activities and quotidian life in Chinatown, there is a special group portrayed by Goth that portrays the paradoxical nature of his artistic practice of the slave girls. Goth's picture book has abundant representation of Chinese slave girls. But again, if I put in slaves in the Google search, this is what I find. I find this. And this. No Chinese people. Okay. All right. Who were openly traded. Okay, so these Chinese girls were openly traded and enslaved in San Francisco in the late 1800s and early 1900s. In an 1897 article, Chinese Slavery in America. So here it is cited in the Stanford paper about Chinese slavery in America. All I did was take the Chinese, I just put slavery in America, and we found some other folks. Pictures. Okay. So, and okay. Openly traded and enslaved in San Francisco in the late 1800s and early 1900s. In an 1897 article, Chinese Slavery in America, the frustrated scientist and intellectual Charles Frederick Holder claimed that the Chinese in America were a constant menace to law, order, and morality. Holder presented that in the heart of an American city, we find one of the best organized slave marts in modern times, fostered as motley a band of criminals as could be produced in any portion of the uncivilized world. Holder's moral judgment of the barbarous nature of female enslavement in Chinese culture was typical of American elites' attitude towards Chinese customs at the time of Chinese girls and young women were routinely kidnapped or deceived into slavery and traded among wealthy Chinese households and brothels to become drudges or prostitutes in California. To the frustration of many American intellectuals, this kind of slavery would not be prevented by American law, as the Chinese formed strong networks among themselves and were good at plotting and tricking the slave girls into making false oaths in court. Holder detailed this phenomenon in his essay, yet what these intellectuals neglected to mention, intentionally or unintentionally, was that the Page Act of 1875, which aimed at preventing Chinese prostitutes from entering the United States, also effectively prevented other Chinese women from coming to the United States, creating a large population of single family list men, Chinese men. Okay, so this person's complaining that the United States tried to ban this sort of slavery, and it stopped the Chinese men from having wives. Well, they could have went back to China and brought their wife back with them. So, but there was something called a Page Act, so it's not like the Americans or the government or our institutions don't know that there was another form of slavery in America, but for some reason, when we talk about American slaves, we only see these people. Okay, so Goff did not seem to be oblivious to the rampant slavery and the debate surrounding it when he included photographs such as rescued slave girls and little tea rose into his books. What do these little slave girls look like? This little itty bitty thing is supposed to be somebody's slave. This one. Could this person pass as somebody else? So these rescued children, were these people put on what we call reservations or missions? They already admitted to missions. So this writer even says that this is ambiguous. How is this ambiguous? Because she looks like a quote unquote Native American? Gentile's ambiguous portrayal of a Chinese woman, as opposed to his clearly defined photographs of other groups of Chinese people, make us wonder about the moral and cultural limits of his Chinatown photography project. So this person complaining about the pictures. Irwin's awe for the Chinese is ironically contradicted by his disdain and fear of this alien racial group. At the same time, in his documentation of a dinner party held at Chinatown one night, as the journalist was watching the unfolding of a drinking game, Irwin made some observations that expressed the deep seated racist anxiety. How was he racist? Because he didn't like slaves? He imagined the demonic transformation of the Chinese at the excited game. Their shouts became squalls, lips drew back from teeth, beady little eyes blazed. There were those old yellow people with whom our fathers fought before the Caucasus was set as a boundary between the dark race and the light, the hordes of Genghis Khan, the looters of Attila. Now, how was this part of this man's imagination? Because he brings up that there was that white and Asians come from Caucasus. As his passion earns change of attitude seemed surprising. He invoked the Mongolian Emperor Genghis Khan and the ruler of the Huns, Attila, to present the essentially hostile relationship between the Asian races and the Caucasian races. As the journalist was absorbed in an imagining of the historical past, he could not help but give in to the racist fear and even hatred toward the Asians. I don't see it. Become squalls, lips drew back. Okay. Depictions of the Chinese reveling a fundamentally ambivalent, if not rancorous attitude many white elites like himself held towards the Chinese and other minority races at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. Okay, well, I just wanted to highlight this article that was from 1897. And so here you can see that you can find this in JustStore. This is what Holder looks like. You can find it in the archives at Yale Internet Archive. So this is a real article about slavery. And for some reason, no one is talking about it. So thank you. Thank you, Brown Liquor No Ice. Thank you for being here. And I am out of here.